The iron manacles bit into Seraphina's wrists as the cart jolted over another rut in the frozen road, and she pressed her bound hands against the swell of her belly, feeling her unborn pup's wolf stir restlessly beneath her palms. 8 months pregnant, abandoned, and now sold like livestock. She had imagined many fates for herself when she'd first felt the flutter of life within her womb, but this particular nightmare had never crossed her mind. "They're afraid of you, little one," she thought, directing the words inward where she could feel the impossible presence of her child's wolf already awakened, already aware. "They're afraid of both of us now." The pup's wolf rumbled in response, a sensation like warm thunder rolling through her core, and Seraphina had to close her eyes against the answering flash of gold she knew would color her irises. That was the problem, wasn't it? That was why Marcus had fled in the middle of the night 3 months ago, leaving nothing but a cold bed and a note that simply read, "I cannot father a monster." She had loved him. Moon above, she had loved him with everything she had given him her virtue, her trust, her future. And the moment their child's wolf had manifested, a phenomenon that should have been impossible until at least 3 years after birth, he had looked at her like she was something diseased, something dangerous, something to be discarded. The cart lurched again, and the guard riding beside the driver spat over the side, the glob of saliva landing dangerously close to where Seraphina sat huddled against the wooden slats. "Cursed breeder," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "Should have drowned her like the elders wanted. Would have been a mercy compared to what the Valewood wolves will do to her." "Blood debt's a blood debt," the driver replied, his voice carrying the flat pragmatism of a man who had long since stopped seeing her as a person. "Pack needed something valuable to pay what we owe. She's carrying something valuable. Math works out." Valuable. Seraphina's throat tightened around a bitter laugh that never escaped her lips. Just yesterday, Elder Thorn had stood before the gathered pack and formally declared what they had been whispering for months, that her child was an abomination, a curse upon their bloodline that needed to be purged. They had tolerated her for 3 months after Marcus fled, barely, grudgingly, because killing a pregnant wolf brought bad luck, even a cursed one. But then the Valewood Kingdom's collectors had arrived, demanding the century-old blood debt be settled immediately or face military consequences. The timing was no coincidence. Seraphina had learned from the guard's careless gossip that someone in the north had been pressuring Valewood to call in old debts, debts that had been conveniently forgotten for 100 years. Someone who collected information about unusual wolves the way others collected gold. The elders had been scrambling for payment when someone realized their abomination might actually be worth something. The original debt she'd gathered was a life debt. Shadowmere's founder had been saved from execution by a Valewood prince, and the pack had promised one life of value in repayment whenever Valewood called. For a century, they never had. Until now. Suddenly her curse had become an acceptable form of payment. The cart crested a hill, and through the gaps between the wooden bars of her cage, Seraphina caught her first glimpse of Valewood Castle. It rose from the winter landscape like a frozen fist, all dark stone and sharp towers, banners of silver and deep green snapping in the bitter wind. Beautiful and terrible in equal measure, exactly like the wolves who ruled within its walls. "This is where we die," she thought, and the pup's wolf snarled in defiant response, pushing against her skin hard enough to make her gasp. "Control that thing," the guard barked, turning to glare at her with unconcealed disgust. "Bad enough we have to deliver you breathing. Don't need you making a scene before we get paid." Seraphina bit her tongue hard enough to taste copper, forcing herself to breathe through the surge of protective rage that flooded her chest. The pup's wolf was responding to her fear, her anger, her grief, feeding on every negative emotion and amplifying it tenfold. Only peace seemed to quiet it, and peace had been in short supply for months. She had spent the last 3 months learning to swallow her feelings, to become numb and hollow, because anything else risked unleashing a power she didn't understand and couldn't control. But now, with the castle looming closer and the end of her road in sight, that careful numbness was beginning to crack. I wanted so much more for you, she thought, rubbing slow circles over her belly. I wanted you to have a father who loved you, a pack who celebrated you, a life full of moonlit runs and family and joy. I wanted. Her throat closed around the words, and she had to turn her face away from the guards to hide the tears that slipped down her wind-chapped cheeks. The cart passed through the outer gates without stopping, the guards waving them through with expressions of grim anticipation. Seraphina's wolf, her own wolf, forced into dormancy by the pregnancy as her body channeled all its shifting energy to nurture the pup, stirred weakly in her chest, responding to the overwhelming presence of so many powerful shifters in such close proximity. Valewood was one of the oldest kingdoms, its wolves descended from the first bloodlines, their power legendary even among their kind. And she was about to be thrown at their feet like yesterday's garbage. The inner courtyard was filled with warriors, servants, and nobility all moving with the purposeful energy of a pack at the height of its power. Seraphina kept her eyes down as the cart rolled to a stop, her bound hands still pressed against her belly, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her temples. "Be still, little one," she pleaded silently. "Please, please be still. Don't let them see what you can do." But her pup had never been good at hiding, had never needed to learn, before Marcus's betrayal, before the pack's judgment, before this frozen road to nowhere. "Get her out." The order came from somewhere above her, sharp and commanding. Rough hands grabbed Seraphina's arms and hauled her upright, ignoring her cry of pain as the motion pulled at muscles already aching from hours of jolting travel. She stumbled as they dragged her from the cart, her swollen ankles nearly giving out beneath her weight, and it took everything she had not to fall face first onto the cobblestones. "Moon's mercy," someone whispered from the gathered crowd. "Look at her eyes." Seraphina squeezed them shut too late. She had felt it the moment she'd stumbled, the pup's wolf surging forward in protective response, flooding her irises with brilliant gold that flickered and danced like flames trapped behind glass. Wrong. Impossible. Every wolf knew that golden eyes meant the beast was close to the surface, that a shift was imminent. But Seraphina couldn't shift. Hadn't been able to since the pregnancy began. This was something else. Her pup's wolf using her body as a vessel, channeling its power through her even though she couldn't shift herself. The healers had called it womb bonding, a rare phenomenon where an exceptionally powerful pup could manifest abilities through its mother. Seraphina had no idea how to stop it. "The cursed breeder," the guard from the cart announced, shoving a scroll toward the nearest Valewood soldier. "Payment in full for the Shadowmere blood debt. One breeding female proven fertile, carrying a viable pup. You can verify the contents if you want, but I'd recommend keeping your distance. Thing in her belly isn't natural." Seraphina's wolf snarled weakly at the casual cruelty of his words, but she forced herself to remain silent. Speaking wouldn't help. Fighting wouldn't help. Nothing would help now except survival, and survival meant becoming invisible, becoming nothing, becoming so small and quiet that maybe they would forget she existed long enough for her to find a way out. The pup's wolf disagreed violently with this strategy, pressing against her skin with restless energy, but Seraphina swallowed hard and pushed the sensation down, down, down into the deepest part of herself. "Please," she begged, "I know you want to protect me, but if you show them what you can do, they'll kill us both. Please, baby, please be still." A moment of resistance, defiance even, that felt far too mature for an unborn child. And then, slowly, the golden light behind her eyelids faded to normal. When Seraphina opened her eyes again, they were their usual amber brown, unremarkable and unthreatening. The Valewood soldier examined the scroll, then examined her, his expression carefully blank. Escort her to the holding cells. We'll sort out what to do with her after the Alpha King reviews the tribute. Tribute. That word again. Not person, not wolf, not even prisoner. Just tribute. An offering. A thing to be inspected and evaluated and disposed of at will. Seraphina let them lead her across the courtyard, past the whispering nobles and the staring servants, toward a door set into the base of the castle's eastern tower. The stones here were older, darker, worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. This was where they kept things they wanted to forget about, she realized. This was where inconvenient problems were stored until someone decided whether to fix them or discard them. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, each step requiring careful navigation around the bulk of her belly. Her bound wrists made balance nearly impossible, and twice she stumbled badly enough that only the guard's grip on her arms kept her from tumbling forward into the darkness. The third time she stumbled, a different hand caught her. Careful. The voice was low, rough like gravel wrapped in velvet, and it came from somewhere below her on the stairs. These steps have been claiming victims since before my grandfather's time. No reason to add yourself to the list. Seraphina looked up, and everything stopped. He was dressed like a common soldier, this man who had caught her. Rough spun uniform, scarred hands, face half hidden by the shadows of the torchlit stairwell. But his eyes, when they met hers, were the gray of storm clouds before lightning struck, and something in their depths made her breath catch in her throat. Her hand was still pressed against her belly, and beneath her palm, the pup's wolf went absolutely, impossibly still. That had never happened before. In 8 months of constant restless motion, of surging and snarling and pressing against her skin with barely contained power, her child's wolf had never simply stopped. It was like watching a storm suddenly freeze in place, every raindrop suspended in midair, waiting. "Eric," he said, still holding her arm where he'd caught her, his grip surprisingly gentle despite the calluses she could feel against her skin. "My name is Eric. I've been assigned to escort you to the cells." Seraphina opened her mouth to respond. To say what? She had no idea. But before she could form words, heat flooded through her chest like someone had poured molten gold directly into her veins. It spread outward from her heart in waves, warm and bright and terrifying, and she watched Eric's gray eyes flash brilliant amber as his nostrils flared, a rumbling growl escaping his chest before he seemed to catch himself. No. The word echoed through Seraphina's mind with the force of a thunderclap. No, this cannot be happening. This is impossible. I am tribute. I am nothing. I am pregnant with another man's child. This cannot. But her wolf knew. Her dormant, sleeping wolf that had barely stirred in 8 months suddenly surged forward with desperate recognition, pressing against her skin, straining toward this stranger with gray eyes and scarred hands, screaming the one word that changed everything. Mate. Eric's fingers tightened on her arm, not painful, never painful, but firm enough that she could feel the tremor running through them. He inhaled sharply, and she knew with absolute certainty, that he was catching her scent, reading her wolf's call, understanding exactly what had just happened between them. His jaw clenched. His eyes flashed amber again, then gray, then amber. A struggle for control playing out across his features in the flickering torchlight. And in her womb, wrapped in the terrifying power of a wolf that shouldn't exist, her unborn child remained absolutely still, watching, waiting, understanding something that Seraphina herself had not yet grasped. The guards above them shifted impatiently. "Everything all right down there?" The guard's voice held an uncertain note, as if something about Eric's presence made him uneasy. Some instinct recognizing authority even when it was hidden. Eric's expression smoothed into careful neutrality so quickly that Serafina almost convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. But her palm still burned where he'd touched her, and her wolf still pressed against her skin with desperate longing, and somewhere deep in her chest, a bond that shouldn't exist had begun to form. "Fine," he called back, his voice betraying nothing. She stumbled. "I caught her. Continue." He released her arm but didn't step away, instead positioning himself at her side as they continued down the stairs. Every nerve ending in Serafina's body was painfully aware of his presence, the heat radiating from his skin, the controlled power in his movements, the way he matched his pace to hers despite the obvious impatience of the guards behind them. She was tribute. She was nothing. She was 8 months pregnant with another man's child, sold by her pack like cattle, expected to die in these very cells. And somehow, impossibly, she had just met her mate. The torchlight flickered against the damp stone walls as they descended deeper into the castle's belly, and Serafina could not stop shaking. Not from cold, though the air grew colder with each step, but from the impossible heat still pulsing through her veins where Eric had touched her. Where he continued to hover close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body like a banked fire. This cannot be real, she thought, her mind spinning in desperate circles. I am 8 months pregnant. I am tribute. I am nothing. And yet, her wolf surged forward again, pressing against her skin with an urgency that bordered on painful, straining toward the man who walked beside her with every fiber of her being. After 8 months of dormancy, of weak, occasional stirrings that were nothing compared to the fierce presence she remembered, her wolf was now utterly, completely awake. And she wanted only one thing: mate. 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 Asterisk. Serafina stumbled again, not on the stairs this time, but on her own trembling legs, and Eric's hand shot out to steady her without hesitation. The moment his calloused fingers wrapped around her elbow, electricity crackled through her nervous system like summer lightning, bright and sharp and devastating in its intensity. "Easy," he murmured, his voice pitched low enough that the guards above them couldn't hear. "I've got you." She looked up at him, unable to stop herself, and their eyes met in the flickering torchlight. His had gone amber again, brilliant, burning amber that seemed to glow with an inner fire, and she watched his nostrils flare as he drew in a deep breath of her scent. A shudder ran through his broad frame, visible even in the dim light, and the low rumble that escaped his chest was unmistakably a growl of pure, primal recognition. He feels it too. The realization crashed through Serafina like a wave, drowning her in equal parts terror and desperate, impossible hope. He knows what I am to him. For a long, suspended moment, neither of them moved. Serafina could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could feel her wolf howling silently beneath her skin, could sense the mate bond stretching between them like a golden thread being pulled taut. She had heard stories about this, about the instant recognition, the overwhelming rightness, the sense that your entire life had been leading to this single moment of connection, but she had never expected to experience it herself. Not after Marcus. Not after everything that had happened. And certainly not like this. In chains, pregnant with another man's child, being led to a cell where she would likely die. Eric's jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle jumping beneath his stubbled cheek. His eyes flickered, amber to gray to amber again, as he fought some internal battle she could only guess at. His fingers tightened on her elbow, then loosened, then tightened again, as if he couldn't decide whether to pull her closer or push her away. "This," he breathed, the word barely audible, "is not possible." "I know," Serafina whispered back, her voice cracking on the words. I know it isn't. But her wolf didn't care about possibility. Her wolf only cared about the man standing before her, the mate she had never expected to find, the bond that was even now weaving itself into her very soul, whether she wanted it to or not. After 8 months of sleeping, her beast had awakened for this. For him. In her womb, the pup's wolf remained impossibly still. Not the anxious stillness of fear, but something else. The focused calm of recognition. As if this stranger with storm-gray eyes and hands scarred from years of sword training was exactly what they had been holding out for all along. Her daughter's wolf, Seraphina realized, responded to safety the same way it responded to threat, with intensity. But this was the stillness of a predator at rest, not a prey animal frozen in terror. Keep moving. The guard's voice echoed down the stairwell, sharp with impatience. We haven't got all day. Eric blinked, and the amber faded from his eyes, replaced by careful gray neutrality. But Seraphina had seen it. She had felt it. And she knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever this was between them, it wasn't going away just because he willed his wolf back under control. Can you walk? He asked, his voice rough, professional, betraying none of what had just passed between them. Seraphina nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her legs still felt like water, her heart still raced like she'd been running for miles, but she forced herself to move forward, to descend the remaining stairs on feet that barely felt connected to her body. The holding cells opened before them, a long corridor lined with iron-barred doors, most of them empty, all of them cold and dark and utterly devoid of hope. Eric led her to the last cell on the right, his hand still hovering near her elbow though no longer touching, and unlocked the door with a key from the ring at his belt. This one, he said quietly. It's the warmest, closest to the kitchen fires above. Seraphina stepped inside, her chains clinking against the stone floor, and turned to face him through the bars. The cell was small but cleaner than she'd expected, with a narrow cot pushed against one wall and a bucket in the corner that she tried not to think too hard about. A thin shaft of light filtered down from a grate somewhere above, illuminating dust motes that danced in the frigid air. Eric stood at the threshold, his hand on the door but not yet closing it. His eyes were gray again, carefully controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers whitened around the iron bars. He was fighting something. Fighting himself. He could take advantage of this, Seraphina realized with sudden crystalline clarity. I am in chains. I am tribute. I am utterly at his mercy. And we are mates. The old stories said that an unclaimed mate bond drove wolves mad with need, that the pull between destined pairs was so strong it overrode all reason, all control, all civilized restraint. That wolves had killed and died for their mates, had started wars and toppled kingdoms, had done terrible things in the grip of that primal, overwhelming connection. And yet Eric simply stood there, every line of his body screaming with barely leashed tension, and did not move. I will return, he said finally, the words sounding like they had been dragged from him against his will. Tonight, after the castle sleeps. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a demand. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet certainty of a man who knew he could not stay away even if he tried. Seraphina should have been afraid. Should have been terrified, really. Alone in a cell with a strange male wolf who had just recognized her as his mate, who had every opportunity to claim what the bond told him was rightfully his. But her wolf felt nothing but desperate longing, and the pup remained impossibly still, and some instinct deeper than reason whispered that this man would never hurt her. Why? She heard herself ask. Why are you being kind to me? Eric's eyes flickered amber again, just for an instant. Because he cut himself off, jaw clenching. Because you deserve kindness, whatever else you are. He closed the cell door before she could respond, the iron lock clicking into place with a sound of finality. His footsteps retreated up the stairs, and Serafina was left alone in the cold and the dark, her wolf howling silently for the mate who had just walked away. She sank onto the narrow cot, pressing her bound hands against her belly, and felt her pup's wolf finally stir. A gentle nudge against her palms, warm and questioning, as if asking what had just happened. I don't know, Serafina thought, tears sliding down her cheeks. I don't know, little one, but I think maybe everything just changed. The hours that followed were the longest of Serafina's life. She huddled on the cot in the cold cell, her chains heavy against her swollen ankles, watching the thin shaft of light from above slowly fade as day turned to evening turned to night. Other guards came and went, bringing her water, checking that she hadn't somehow escaped her iron cage, but none of them spoke to her beyond gruff commands, and none of them had eyes that made her wolf strain against her skin. She slept in fits and starts, haunted by dreams of amber eyes and calloused hands, and a voice like velvet-wrapped gravel saying her name. In her womb, the pup's wolf paced restlessly, no longer still but not surging either, as if waiting for something it couldn't quite name. The castle had gone quiet, that deep, heavy silence of a world asleep, when Serafina heard footsteps on the stairs. She sat up on the cot, her heart suddenly pounding, and watched the darkness beyond her cell door with wide eyes. The footsteps were quiet, careful, deliberately muffled against the stone. Someone who didn't want to be heard. A shape materialized out of the shadows, and Serafina's wolf leaped forward with desperate recognition. Eric. He carried a bundle under one arm and moved with the controlled grace of a predator, every movement efficient and silent. When he reached her cell, he didn't immediately speak, just stood there in the darkness, studying her through the iron bars with eyes that gleamed faintly silver in the dim light filtering from above. I brought blankets, he said finally, his voice low and rough. It's too cold down here for someone in your condition. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, and Serafina's breath caught in her throat. He was close now, close enough that she could smell him. Pine and wood smoke, and something deeper. Something wild and male that made her wolf whine with longing. Close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly as he set the bundle down on the cot beside her. You didn't have to do this, she whispered, because she didn't know what else to say. Because kindness was so unexpected, so foreign, that she barely knew how to receive it anymore. No, Eric agreed quietly. I didn't. But he had done it anyway. And when he unfolded the blankets, 3 of them, thick wool that must have cost more than anything Serafina had ever owned, and draped them gently over her shivering form, his hands were so careful that she almost wept. He didn't touch her. Not once. Even when his fingers came within inches of her skin, even when every line of his body screamed with the effort of restraint, he maintained that careful distance. As if he understood, somehow, that she had been touched without consent too many times to trust unsolicited contact, no matter how well-intentioned. There's broth, he added, pulling a still warm flask from beneath his uniform. The kitchen's had extra. I thought, the pup needs... He cut himself off, a muscle jumping in his jaw. You need to eat. Serafina took the flask with trembling hands, feeling the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. When she lifted it to her lips and tasted the rich, savory broth inside, her stomach clenched with desperate hunger, and she had to force herself to drink slowly rather than gulp it down like a starving animal. Eric settled himself against the wall outside her cell, just beyond the threshold, close enough that she could feel his presence but clearly not intending to intrude on her space. He drew his knees up, rested his arms across them, and watched her with eyes that saw far too much. Why are you doing this? Serafina asked again, the question escaping before she could stop it. I'm tribute. I'm nothing. You don't have to. Stop. The word was quiet but firm, carrying an authority that made her wolf want to bare its throat in submission. Don't call yourself that. Don't ever call yourself that. Seraphina's throat tightened. It's what I am. It's what my pack. Your pack sold you. The anger in Eric's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear it simmering beneath the surface. Your pack looked at a pregnant woman and saw a debt to be paid rather than a life to be protected. That makes them monsters, not you. The tears came then, hot and unexpected, spilling down Seraphina's cheeks before she could stop them. She had spent so long swallowing her grief, pushing it down, refusing to feel the full weight of her pack's betrayal. But something about Eric's quiet fury on her behalf cracked through her defenses, and suddenly the pain was too enormous to contain. Eric made a sound low in his throat, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, and she watched him grip his own arms hard enough to leave bruises, fighting the obvious urge to go to her. But he stayed where he was, outside the cell, respecting her space even as every instinct surely screamed at him to comfort his mate. "What's your pup like?" he asked instead, his voice carefully gentle. Can you feel it? It's Wolf?" Seraphina's hand went to her belly instinctively, pressing against the swell where her child grew. "It's strong," she whispered. "Stronger than any wolf should be before birth. That's why Marcus left." He could feel the power, and it terrified him. "Marcus?" Eric said the name like a curse. "That's the father?" "He was my mate." The words tasted like ash on Seraphina's tongue. "Or I thought he was. We were together for 2 years before I conceived. I thought we would be together forever." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I was wrong." Eric was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "The bond between you and him, did it feel like—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Seraphina understood what he was asking, and the answer made her chest ache with a complicated tangle of grief and wonder and fear. "No," she admitted quietly. "It never felt like this." Their eyes met through the darkness, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement, an understanding, a recognition of the impossible thing that had sparked to life in that stairwell. The bond between them pulsed gently in Seraphina's chest, warm and insistent, demanding her attention no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. In her womb, her daughter's wolf stirred, not the violent surging of before, but a gentle, curious nudge, as if the child was reaching toward this stranger who had brought warmth and food and unexpected kindness. "It's moving," Seraphina said, surprised. "The pup. It hasn't moved like this in days. It usually only stirs when it's upset, when it's protecting me, but this is different." Eric's voice was barely above a whisper. "Peaceful," Seraphina said, wonderingly. "It feels peaceful?" Eric's hands tightened on his own arms, and she saw him swallow hard. "Good," he said roughly. That's good." The silence that followed was strangely comfortable, despite everything. Seraphina finished the broth and wrapped herself more tightly in the blankets Eric had brought, feeling warmer and safer than she had in months, and Eric stayed where he was, just outside her cell, a silent guardian in the darkness. When she began to drift towards sleep, exhaustion finally overtaking fear, she heard him humming softly, an old lullaby, the song of the first moon, which every wolf mother learned to sing to her pups. Seraphina's own mother had hummed the same melody to her as a child, before sickness had claimed her. The familiar tune wrapped around Seraphina like another blanket, and when the pup's wolf stirred violently enough to cause her pain, Eric's humming grew louder, more insistent, until the restless power inside her settled into calm. She slept better that night than she had in 8 months. Morning came with the sound of boots on stone and voices raised in casual cruelty. "Heard we got new tribute." someone was saying, the words drifting down the stairwell ahead of the speaker. Pregnant bitch from Shadowmere, carrying some kind of demon spawn, according to the report. Demon spawn? Another voice, this one tinged with eager malice. That's gotta be worth seeing. Be worth more than seeing, if you know what I mean. Laughter, ugly and knowing. Been a while since we had any breeding stock in the cells. Might be the last chance to… Stand down. Eric's voice cut through the crude speculation like a blade, cold and commanding in a way that made Seraphina's blood run hot and cold at once. She had risen from the cot at the first sound of voices, pressed herself against the far wall of her cell, her hands instinctively cradling her belly. But now she watched through the bars as Eric materialized at the bottom of the stairs, placing himself directly between the approaching soldiers and her cell. Eric? The first soldier, a thick-necked brute with mean eyes, faltered slightly at the sight of him. Didn't realize you were down here. Captain said you were assigned escort duty, but surely you're not actually guarding the tribute? The tribute, Eric said, his voice dangerously soft, is under Valewood protection. That means she is afforded the same respect as any wolf within these walls. Is that understood? Something in his tone made both soldiers stiffen, an undercurrent of command that didn't match his uniform, that made their wolves want to bare their throats despite his apparent rank. Respect? The brute laughed, though there was an uncertain edge to it now. She's tribute, Eric. She's property. You can't seriously expect us to treat property like… I expect. Eric took a step forward, and suddenly he seemed larger, more dangerous, his presence filling the narrow corridor in a way that made the two soldiers take an instinctive step back. I expect every wolf in this castle to remember that we are not savages. I expect that pregnant females under our care will be treated with dignity, regardless of their origin, and I expect… His voice dropped to a growl that made Seraphina's wolf whimper with recognition. That any soldier who suggests otherwise will answer to me personally. Is that clear? The silence that followed was absolute. Seraphina watched the soldiers exchange glances, watched them recalculate their position, watched them recognize that they had badly misjudged the situation. Crystal clear, the brute said finally, his voice sullen but subdued. Apologies. We didn't mean any offense. Then we have no problem. Eric's posture relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained hard. You may leave. Now. They left. Quickly, without looking back, their footsteps retreating up the stairs with obvious relief, and Seraphina stood in her cell, her heart pounding, staring at the man who had just defended her honor without hesitation or qualification. He turned to face her through the bars, and something in his expression made her chest ache. Not the cold authority he'd shown the soldiers, but something softer, something almost vulnerable beneath the careful control. I apologize, he said quietly. You shouldn't have had to hear that. You stopped them. Seraphina's voice came out barely above a whisper. You didn't have to do that. I'm just tribute. I'm not… They're not wrong about what I am. They are wrong? Eric's jaw clenched, and she watched his hands curl into fists at his sides. They are completely and utterly wrong. You are not property. You are not breeding stock. You are a wolf, carrying a pup, and anyone who treats you as less than that is a disgrace to their own bloodline. He spoke with such absolute conviction that Seraphina almost believed him, almost forgot the months of shame and degradation, the whispers of her pack, the look in Marcus's eyes when he'd called their child a monster. Almost felt for just a moment like she might actually be worth something after all. Why? The question escaped her before she could stop it, raw and desperate. Why do you care? You don't even know me. You don't know anything about me except that I'm… your mate. Her wolf finished silently. That's what you are. His mate. But she couldn't say that out loud, Couldn't acknowledge it, couldn't give it power, because if she did, if she let herself hope, Eric stepped closer to the bars, close enough that she could see the storm clouds gathering in his gray eyes. I know enough, he said, his voice rough. I know that you've been hurt. I know that you've been abandoned. I know that you're carrying a pup that should be celebrated rather than feared, and I know. He stopped, throat working. I know that you deserve so much more than a cell in chains and soldiers who speak of you like you're nothing. How? Seraphina's voice cracked. How can you possibly know that? For a long moment, Eric didn't answer. She watched him struggle with something, some internal battle playing out across his features. The same battle she'd witnessed on the stairs, when the mate bond had first flared to life between them. Because I can feel it, he finally admitted, the words coming out like a confession. When I look at you, when I sent you, there's something I can't explain. Something that tells me you're. He trailed off. But Seraphina heard the word he didn't say. The word that hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible and terrifying. Mine. In her womb, the pup's wolf nudged gently against her palms, warm and curious and strangely content. As if it, too, recognized this man. As if it had been waiting for him all along. And Seraphina felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt dangerously, wonderfully like the first fragile stirring of hope. The hope was dangerous. Seraphina knew it even as it bloomed in her chest, warm and treacherous, threatening to undo all the careful walls she'd built around her heart. She should crush it now, before it could take root, before it could grow into something that would only hurt more when it was inevitably ripped away. But Eric was still standing there, his gray eyes soft with something that looked almost like tenderness, and her wolf was pressing against her skin with an insistence she hadn't felt since before her pregnancy began. And the pup's wolf was so quiet now, so content, as if the mere presence of this man had soothed something that had been restless since conception. You should rest, Eric said quietly, and there was a roughness to his voice that suggested he was struggling with the same impossible pull she felt. The cells are cold at night, and you need your strength. I'll come back in the morning to check on you. It wasn't a promise. It was more than that. It was a vow, spoken with the kind of quiet intensity that made Seraphina's breath catch in her throat. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and watched him turn away with obvious reluctance. His footsteps echoed on the stone stairs, each one taking him farther from her, and she felt the distance like a physical ache. She should have been relieved. She should have welcomed the space, the chance to think clearly without his scent clouding her senses, and his presence making her wolf howl for things she couldn't have. Instead, she felt cold, bereft, as if something essential had been taken from her. Seraphina lowered herself onto the thin straw mattress, her hand settling over her swollen belly. The pup's wolf stirred lazily, its presence warm and comforting against her palm. What are we going to do? She whispered into the darkness. He's not like Marcus. I can feel it. But I'm still Tribute. I'm still nothing. And you. She stopped, throat tightening, because even now, even here, she couldn't quite bring herself to voice the fear that had haunted her for months. The fear that her child's wolf was too powerful, too wild, too other to ever be accepted. The pup's wolf nudged against her hand, and Seraphina could have sworn she felt a whisper of reassurance, as if the unborn creature could sense her distress and was trying, in its own way, to comfort her. She fell asleep with her palm pressed to her belly and Eric's scent still lingering in her lungs. The morning brought chaos. Seraphina woke to the sound of trumpets. Harsh, ceremonial blasts that echoed through the dungeon's stone corridors and made her pup's wolf jerk to sudden, violent alertness. She sat up too quickly, her back protesting, her hand automatically flying to her stomach as she tried to orient herself. Footsteps on the stairs, multiple sets, moving with purpose, and voices. Raised voices, speaking in the clipped tones of formal announcement. The Northern delegation has arrived. Alpha Frostborn demands an audience with the king. Seraphina's blood went cold. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Jasper Frostborn, Alpha of the Northern Reaches, was legendary, not for his honor or his wisdom, but for his ruthlessness. His pack had been expanding for decades, absorbing smaller territories through a combination of strategic marriages and carefully orchestrated accidents that eliminated rival alphas. Rumors spoke of breeding programs, of wolves selected and paired like livestock to produce the strongest possible offspring. And now he was here, in Valewood, demanding an audience with the king. The dungeon door banged open, and Seraphina pressed herself back against the cold stone wall as guards flooded down the stairs. These weren't the same soldiers from the previous night. They wore different colors, silver and ice blue rather than Valewood's forest green. And their eyes, when they found her through the bars of her cell, held a calculating interest that made her stomach turn. Well, well. A new voice, smooth and cold as winter ice. So this is the tribute that's caused such a stir. The man who descended the stairs moved like a predator, all controlled grace and barely leashed power. He was handsome in a severe way, with sharp cheekbones and hair so pale it was nearly white, cropped close to his skull. His eyes were blue, but not the warm blue of summer skies. This was the blue of frozen lakes, of glaciers, of things that killed slowly and without mercy. Jasper Frostborn smiled, and Seraphina's pup's wolf began to growl. Fascinating, Jasper murmured, stepping closer to the bars. His nostrils flared as he scented her, and something hungry flickered across his features. Absolutely fascinating. My spies in Shadowmere told me your child's wolf was strong. That's why I arranged for Valewood to finally collect on that old debt. I needed you brought somewhere I could negotiate, but I had no idea. He trailed off, his gaze dropping to her swollen belly with an intensity that made her skin crawl. I can sense it from here. The power. It's remarkable. Who are you? Seraphina managed, though her voice trembled despite her efforts to control it. What do you want? How rude of me. Jasper executed an elaborate bow, mockery dripping from every movement. Jasper Frostborn, Alpha of the Northern Reaches. I'm here as a diplomatic guest of the Valewood Kingdom, and to assess certain assets that have recently come into their possession. Assets. The word hit her like a blow, because she knew exactly what he meant, what he was looking at when his cold blue eyes traced the curve of her belly. I'm not an asset, she said, forcing steel into her voice. I'm tribute. I belong to Valewood now. Belong. Jasper laughed, a sound like breaking ice. Such an interesting word. Tell me, little breeder, has Valewood marked you, claimed you, made any formal declaration of ownership? Seraphina's silence was answer enough. I thought not. Jasper's smile widened, and she saw the wolf behind his eyes, pale and massive and utterly without mercy. Which means you're still very much available, and I intend to make a compelling case for your relocation. She stays where she is. The voice came from the stairs, and Seraphina's heart lurched as Eric descended into the dungeon. He was dressed differently today. Simple clothes replaced by leather armor and a sword at his hip. But his eyes were the same. Gray and storm-touched, and currently blazing with barely contained fury. Jasper turned, his expression shifting to one of polite confusion. And you are? Her guard. Eric's voice was flat, dangerous. Assigned by the king himself, which means if you want to take her anywhere, you'll have to go through me first. A guard? Jasper's gaze swept over Eric with obvious dismissal. How quaint. I don't believe I caught your name. I don't believe I offered it. The air between them crackled with tension. Serafina watched, her heart pounding, as two predators sized each other up across the length of her cell. And something in her gut told her that this was more than a territorial dispute over tribute. This was personal. I'll speak with the king, Jasper said finally, his tone suggesting this wasn't over, merely delayed. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone. His eyes found Serafina through the bars one last time, and the hunger in them made her shudder. Until then, little breeder, try not to strain yourself. That pup of yours is far too valuable to risk. He swept up the stairs, his guards following in formation, and Serafina didn't breathe again until the dungeon door slammed shut behind them. Eric. His name came out on a gasp, all her careful composure crumbling. Eric, he knows. About the pup. About the wolf. He wants. I know what he wants. Eric's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He moved to her cell, his hands wrapping around the bars as if he wanted to tear them apart with his bare fingers. He's been expanding his territory for years, trying to breed stronger wolves. Your pup's power. It's exactly what he's been looking for. How do you know so much about him? Something flickered across Eric's features, something that looked almost like guilt. The king has been watching him for a long time. Frostborn is dangerous. His methods are cruel. The wolves he breeds are treated like tools, not children. He wants power, not family. And you think he wants my pup? I know he does. Eric's voice dropped, rough and urgent. Listen to me. Whatever happens, whatever he says, don't agree to anything. Don't let him touch you. Don't let him take you anywhere alone. I don't care what pressure he puts on the court, what threats he makes. You are not going to the northern reaches. He paused, his expression hardening. And if he threatens you or the pup directly, remember that under the old laws, any wolf may claim the right to answer threats against their young, even against an alpha. The courts have honored such claims for centuries. The ferocity in his voice made her wolf press against her skin, responding to the protective rage radiating from him. And despite everything, despite the fear coiling in her stomach, and the knowledge that she was just tribute, just nothing, she believed him. Why? She asked again, because she couldn't help herself. Why do you care so much? I'm not worth starting a conflict with the northern reaches. I'm not worth risking. You are worth everything. The words escaped him like they'd been torn from his chest, raw and unguarded and utterly sincere. Serafina stared at him through the bars, watching the color rise in his face as he realized what he'd said. I shouldn't. He pulled back from the bars, running a scarred hand through his dark hair. I'm sorry. That wasn't appropriate. You're under my protection, and I shouldn't. It's the bond, Serafina heard herself saying, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Isn't it? That's why why we both feel? Yes. Eric's voice was barely audible. I felt it yesterday, on the stairs, when I touched you. And I've been trying to control it, to give you space, because you've been through so much, and the last thing I need is another mate who abandons me. She hadn't meant to say it so bluntly, but the words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. Eric flinched as if she'd struck him. I would never. He stopped, swallowed hard. I would never abandon you. Or your pup. I don't care who the father was. I don't care that the wolf is strong. I care about you. Both of you. And I know you have no reason to trust me, no reason to believe anything I say, but I swear to you on my life. Don't. Serafina shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. Don't make promises you can't keep. You're a guard. I'm tribute. Whatever this bond is, whatever it wants, it doesn't change what we are. You're wrong about that. There was something strange in Eric's voice now, something almost like certainty. He stepped closer to the bars again, close enough that she could see the gold beginning to flicker in the depths of his gray eyes. There are things I need to tell you, he said quietly. Things that will change. Everything. But not here. Not where he might have ears listening. Tonight, when the castle sleeps, I'll come to you, and I'll tell you the truth. All of it. What truth? But Eric shook his head, his expression troubled. Tonight, I promise. Just hold on until then. Can you do that for me? In her womb, the pup's wolf stirred, and Seraphina felt a strange sensation, almost like encouragement. Like the unborn creature was urging her to trust this man, despite every instinct screaming that trust was dangerous. Tonight, she agreed, and watched relief flood his scarred features. But if you don't show, I'll show. He reached through the bars, his calloused fingers brushing her cheek so gently it made her heart ache. Wild wolves couldn't keep me away. He left then, climbing the stairs with obvious reluctance, and Seraphina pressed her hand to the spot where his fingers had touched her skin. It still tingled with warmth, with the echo of the mate bond that pulsed between them like a second heartbeat. Tonight, she thought. Tonight I'll learn the truth. But the truth, when it came, would be even more extraordinary than anything she could have imagined. The hours crawled by like wounded creatures, each one stretching into an eternity of waiting and worrying. Seraphina paced her cell until her feet ached, then sat until her back protested, then paced again. The pup's wolf remained unusually active, stirring and nudging and occasionally growling at shadows that weren't there. She knew it could sense something. The danger. The tension that permeated the castle above her, leaking down through stone and mortar to fill the dungeon with its heavy presence. Jasper Frostborn was making his move. She could feel it the way she could feel a storm approaching, that prickle of electricity in the air, that sense of something massive and terrible gathering on the horizon. When the dungeon door finally opened, long after darkness had fallen, Seraphina's heart leaped into her throat. But it was Eric who descended the stairs, his footsteps quiet and careful, his expression troubled. I don't have much time, he said as he reached her cell. Frostborn has been in council with the king's advisors all day. He's demanding you be included in an expanded treaty negotiation. He wants to take you north as part of a political agreement. And the king? What does he say? Eric's jaw tightened. The king is considering his options. Frostborn is threatening war if his demands aren't met. The northern reaches have been building their army for years. A direct conflict would cost thousands of lives. So he's going to give me to him. Seraphina heard the flatness in her own voice, the resignation. To avoid a war. I'm just tribute after all. One pregnant wolf isn't worth... No. The word cracked through the air like a whip. No. He is not going to give you to anyone. I won't allow it. You're a guard, Eric. What can you possibly... I'm not a guard. The confession fell between them like a stone into still water, ripples spreading outward into silence. Seraphina stared at him, watching his expression shift from troubled to something almost afraid. What? Eric closed his eyes for a moment as if gathering his courage. When he opened them again, they were flickering gold. My name is Eric Valewood, he said quietly. I'm the Alpha King of Valewood. He touched the simple leather band at his wrist. Seraphina had noticed it before, but thought nothing of it. This charm masks my scent and mutes my alpha aura. I've worn it for years when I need to move among my people unnoticed. Most wolves in the castle have never seen my face. I rule from council chambers, not public audiences. And I went undercover to assess the tribute personally because I was tired of advisors filtering everything through politics and protocol. I wanted to see with my own eyes what my kingdom had purchased. He laughed, the sound bitter and self-mocking. I never expected, I never thought I would find your mate. Seraphina's voice came out barely above a whisper. You found your mate. In the tribute your kingdom bought like cattle. I found you. Eric, the Alpha King, pressed his forehead against the bars, his calloused hands gripping the iron until his knuckles went white. And you're not cattle. You're not tribute. You're the woman destiny chose for me, carrying a pup with power I've never sensed in all my years of rule, and I will burn the northern reaches to the ground before I let Jasper Frostborn touch you. Seraphina should have been angry. She should have felt betrayed, manipulated, used. All those intimate moments, the nightmares he'd sat through, the soldiers he'd defended her from, had been lies. He hadn't been a simple guard with kind eyes. He'd been testing her, evaluating her, deciding if she was worthy of his kingdom's protection. But when she looked at him now, all she could see was the same man who'd brought her broth and blankets, the same man who'd stepped between her and cruelty without hesitation. The same man whose touch made her wolf sing and her pup's wolf go still with recognition. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. The admission seemed to cost him something, his proud shoulders bowing slightly. Afraid you'd see the crown instead of the man. Afraid you'd think everything I felt was about duty instead of this. He pressed his hand flat against the bars, palm facing her, and Seraphina understood. He was asking permission. Not demanding, not taking, asking. She lifted her own hand and pressed it against his through the cold iron, feeling that same electric warmth flood through her veins. What happens now? She asked. Now I stop pretending. Eric's gray eyes, no, gold eyes, burning with the power of his wolf, met hers with absolute certainty. Tomorrow I announce our bond before the entire court. I claim you as my mate, my Luna, my queen. And when Jasper Frostborn objects, because he will object, I will make it very clear that anyone who threatens you or your pup will face the full wrath of the Valewood crown. He'll call for war. Let him. Eric's smile was sharp, dangerous, utterly alpha. The Valewood army has been waiting for an excuse to deal with the northern reaches for decades. If he wants to start a conflict over my mate, I will finish it. In her womb, the pup's wolf howled, a sound of triumph that only Seraphina could hear. And despite everything, despite the danger still gathering like storm clouds on the horizon, she felt something unfurl in her chest. Not just hope now. Faith. One condition, she said, and watched Eric's eyebrows rise in surprise. If you're claiming me before the court, I want to be standing beside you when you do it. Not in chains, not in a cell. I want to walk into that throne room with my head held high, and I want everyone to see exactly who their new queen is. Eric stared at her for a long moment, and then he laughed. A real laugh, warm and bright and utterly delighted. I think I'm going to love you, he said wonderingly. And Seraphina, who had sworn never to trust again, felt her heart answer. I think I'm going to love you too. The morning of the announcement dawned gray and cold, winter sunlight filtering through clouds that seemed to mirror the tension coiling through the castle. Seraphina stood before the mirror in the chambers Eric had arranged for her. Real chambers now, with a proper bed and a fire in the hearth, and windows that looked out over the snow-covered gardens of Valewood. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Someone had brought her a gown during the night. Deep emerald velvet that somehow accommodated her swollen belly while making her look regal rather than ridiculous. Her dark hair had been brushed until it gleamed, falling in waves over her shoulders. And her eyes, those eyes that had flashed gold against her will for months, now held steady amber light. Her pup's wolf paced within her, alert but calm, waiting. Today, Seraphina thought, pressing her hand against the swell of her stomach. Today, everything changes. A knock at her door made her turn, and when Eric entered, she felt the mate bond pulse between them like a second heartbeat. He was dressed in formal royal attire now, black and silver, the colors of the Valewood crown, and he looked every inch the Alpha King. But his eyes softened when they found hers, and she saw the same man who had sat outside her cell through her nightmares. "You look—" He paused, seemingly struggling for words. "You look like a queen. I look like a heavily pregnant woman in a borrowed dress. You look like my mate." He crossed the room to her, and when he took her hands in his, she felt warmth flood through her palms. "Are you ready?" "No." Seraphina laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. "But I don't think that matters, does it? We face this together or not at all." Eric lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Together. The throne room was already full when they arrived. Seraphina could hear the murmur of voices through the massive oak doors. Hundreds of wolves gathered to witness what they thought would be a routine treaty negotiation. She took a deep breath, feeling her pup's wolf stir in response to her anxiety. "Steady," she told the wolf within. "We are not afraid." The doors swung open. Every head in the room turned toward them. Seraphina felt the weight of 100 stares pressing against her skin, felt the whispers begin as wolves recognized the pregnant tribute who had been brought to their kingdom in chains just days ago. She heard the words, "cursed breeder" and "demon spawn," ripple through the crowd like poison. But Eric's hand was steady on her arm, and she lifted her chin and walked forward. The throne of Valewood sat at the far end of the room, massive and ancient, and carved from a single piece of dark wood. Jasper Frostborn stood before it, his pale eyes narrowing with barely concealed rage as he watched them approach. He was flanked by a dozen Northern Reaches guards, their presence a clear threat despite the supposed diplomatic nature of this gathering. "What is the meaning of this?" Jasper's voice cut through the whispers, sharp and demanding. "The tribute should be in the cells, and you—" His gaze swept over Eric's royal attire, and understanding dawned in his cold eyes. "Ah, the guard who was so protective of our prize. I should have known." "Alpha Frostborn." Eric's voice carried the weight of command, silencing the remaining murmurs. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "The tribute, you mean?" Jasper smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "I was under the impression she was owed to the Valewood crown as payment for a blood debt. Property of the kingdom, not any individual wolf." "She is not property." Eric released Seraphina's arm and stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the Northern Alpha. "She is my mate. My Luna. My queen." The silence that fell over the throne room was absolute. Then chaos erupted. Wolves shouted over each other, some in outrage and others in shock. Jasper's guards stepped forward, hands moving toward weapons. And through it all, Seraphina felt her pup's wolf begin to growl, a low, warning sound that vibrated through her entire body. "This is madness." Jasper's voice rose above the din, commanding silence through sheer force of will. "You cannot mate with tribute. She is nothing. A discarded breeder carrying another man's child. A child, I might add, whose wolf is so abnormal that her own pack feared it. You would make this aberration your queen? I would make her my everything." Eric's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising to the surface. "And you will speak of her with respect, or you will not speak at all." "Respect?" Jasper laughed, the sound cold and mocking. "For a woman whose mate abandoned her because her child was too monstrous to love? For a creature whose unborn pup's wolf is so strong it manifested in the womb? Something that should be impossible. Something that speaks to dark magic or worse." He stepped forward, past Eric, and Seraphina felt his gaze lock onto her belly with hungry intensity. "I know what that child is worth," Jasper continued, his voice dropping to something almost seductive. A wolf that powerful, bred with the right bloodlines, my bloodlines, could produce an army of supernatural strength. The northern reaches would be unstoppable. And you, little breeder. He reached toward her, and Seraphina felt ice crawl down her spine. You could be queen of a real kingdom, not this crumbling southern ruin. Eric moved to intercept him, but Jasper was faster. His hand closed around Seraphina's wrist, and she felt wrongness flood through her at his touch, every cell in her body recoiling from the contact. Her pup's wolf went berserk. The power that erupted from her was like nothing she had ever experienced. Golden light blazed from her skin, burning Jasper's hand where it gripped her and forcing him back with a cry of pain. The light spread outward, filling the throne room with radiance that made wolves shield their eyes and stumble away. And through it all, Seraphina felt her pup's wolf rising up to meet her own. Two spirits joining, mother and child united in a single purpose. No more running, she thought. No more fear. You want to know what my child is worth? Her voice came out doubled, layered with the growl of her pup's wolf. Her eyes blazed like twin suns, and she felt power crackling through her veins. Power she had spent months terrified of. Power she had been told was monstrous and wrong. But it wasn't wrong. It was hers. My child is worth more than your entire kingdom. Seraphina stepped forward, and wolves scrambled out of her path. My child is worth more than your bloodlines, your army, your petty ambitions. My child is loved, was always loved, even when I feared what that love meant. Jasper backed away, his burned hand clutched against his chest, genuine fear flickering in his pale eyes. What are you? I am a mother. Seraphina felt her pup's wolf lend her claws, felt them slide from her fingertips with a pain that was almost pleasure. I am a mate. I am the woman who was sold as tribute and rose to become queen. And you. She stalked toward him, golden light blazing around her like a corona. You will not touch my pup. Jasper lunged. It was a desperate move, the action of a wolf who knew he had lost but couldn't accept defeat. He shifted mid-leap, his white wolf bursting from his human form with teeth bared and claws extended. Seraphina didn't flinch. Her pup's wolf surged forward, lending her strength that should have been impossible for a pregnant woman. She caught Jasper's wolf by the throat with claws that burned with golden fire, and she threw him, threw an alpha wolf, across the throne room like he weighed nothing at all. Jasper crashed against the stone wall and crumpled to the ground, shifting back to human form with a whimper of pain. Blood streamed from the claw marks on his throat, and when he looked up at Seraphina, there was terror in his eyes. "You're a monster," he gasped. "That child is a monster." No. Seraphina crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, her claws still extended, her eyes still blazing gold. I'm a mother protecting my pup. You're the monster who threatened an unborn child for power. She heard Eric behind her, felt his wolf's presence pressing against her consciousness through their forming bond. He wanted to make the kill himself. She could feel his protective rage, his need to eliminate the threat to his mate. But this wasn't his fight. It was hers. He threatened my child, she said, without turning. The killing blow is mine. Jasper laughed, the sound bubbling through the blood in his throat. You're just a discarded breeder. You can't even... Seraphina's claws tore through his throat before he could finish. It was quick, quicker than he deserved, perhaps. But as his blood spilled across the stone floor and his eyes went glassy and still, Seraphina felt something settle in her chest. A resolution, a closing of a chapter that had begun the moment her mate had fled, rather than accept the child growing within her. My child is not too strong, she said quietly, watching the last light fade from Jasper's eyes. You were simply too weak. The Northern Reaches guards who had accompanied Jasper stood frozen, their faces pale with shock. Without their alpha, they were leaderless, and surrounded by Valewood wolves, who had just witnessed their master threaten the king's mate. One by one, they dropped their weapons and fell to their knees in surrender. The throne room was silent. Then Eric was there, his arms wrapping around her from behind, his face pressing into her hair. "You're magnificent," he breathed against her ear. "You're absolutely magnificent." Seraphina sagged back against him, feeling her pup's wolf retreat back into contented stillness. The golden light faded from her skin, and she was suddenly exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that came from using power she hadn't known she possessed. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Almost." Eric turned her in his arms, cupping her face in his battle-worn hands. "There's one thing left." She knew what he meant, could feel it in the way the mate bond pulsed between them, incomplete and aching for resolution. The marking, the claiming, the final seal on everything they had become to each other. "Not here," she said. "Not with him. With that. No." Eric's eyes were soft, understanding. "Not here, but soon. Tonight." He turned to address the assembled wolves, his voice carrying the full weight of the Alpha King's authority. "What you have witnessed today is the defense of your future queen and heir against a foreign threat. Alpha Jasper Frostborn is dead by the hand of my mate, as is her right under the old laws. Any wolf who questions her place at my side will answer to me personally." His arm tightened around Seraphina's waist, possessive and proud. "Prepare for a mating ceremony. Tonight, Seraphina will be marked as Luna and take her place as Queen of Valewood." The roar of approval that swept through the throne room made Seraphina's knees buckle. Eric caught her, lifting her into his arms despite her protesting laugh. "I can walk," she insisted. "I know." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, and she felt love flood through the bond between them. "Let me carry you anyway." She let him. The chambers they returned to were warm and quiet, the chaos of the throne room fading to a distant memory. Eric set her down on the bed with infinite gentleness, then knelt before her and pressed his forehead against her belly. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for protecting her. Thank you for choosing to fight instead of flee. Thank you for being everything I never knew I needed." Seraphina's fingers found his hair, stroking through the dark strands touched with silver at the temples, marks of the burdens he'd carried as king. "Her?" Eric lifted his head, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I can sense her now, through the bond, through whatever connection you opened when you channeled her power." His hand spread across her belly, reverent and wondering. "She's going to be extraordinary, just like her mother." Tears pricked at Seraphina's eyes. All those months of terror, of being told her child was cursed, an abomination, too powerful to love. And now here was this man, this Alpha King, calling her daughter extraordinary. "Eric." His name came out broken, and she pulled him up to meet her lips. The kiss was soft at first, tender, a promise more than a demand. But the mate bond surged between them, demanding completion, and soon Seraphina was clutching at his shoulders while he pressed her back against the pillows. "Wait." He pulled back, his eyes flickering between gray and gold. "Are you... the baby?" "She's fine." Seraphina could feel her daughter's wolf, calm and content within her womb. "She knows. She approves." Eric laughed, the sound a little wild. "Of course she does." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Seraphina felt the world narrow to just the two of them. His hands in her hair, his body warm against hers, the bond between them singing with anticipation. Then he pulled back and did something that made her breath catch in her throat. He bared his neck. "You first," he said, his voice rough with need. "I want to wear your mark before you wear mine. I want everyone to know that I belong to you, just as much as you belong to me." Seraphina's wolf surged forward, and for the first time she didn't fight it. She felt her canines lengthen, felt power flood through her veins, felt every nerve ending come alive with the rightness of this moment. "Are you sure?" Her voice came out barely human, layered with her wolf's growl. "Once I mark you, I have never been more sure of anything in my life." Eric's eyes were pure gold now, his wolf staring out at her with adoration and surrender. "Mark me, Seraphina. Make me yours." She leaned forward and sank her teeth into the junction of his neck and shoulder. Eric's roar shook the walls, his hands clenched in her hair, pulling her closer rather than pushing her away, and she felt his pleasure through the bond like a wave crashing over her. Blood filled her mouth, hot and copper and tasting like forever, and she felt the mate bond snap into a new configuration. She could feel his heartbeat now, could feel his wolf curling around hers in something that went beyond physical, could feel everything he felt for her. The awe, the desire, the bone-deep devotion that had taken root in his soul from the moment he first touched her hand through prison bars. When she released him, her mark stood stark and beautiful against his throat, a crescent of healing punctures that would scar silver. "Mine," she whispered, tracing the mark with her fingers. "Yours." Eric's voice was wrecked, shattered with emotion. "Always yours." Then his hands cupped her face, and she saw the hunger in his eyes shift to something predatory. "My turn," he growled. He lowered his mouth to her throat slowly, giving her time to object, to pull away. But Seraphina tilted her head back and bared her neck with trust she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. His teeth broke skin and the world exploded into starlight. The pain was exquisite. A burning that transformed almost instantly into pleasure so intense, Seraphina cried out. She felt his claim flood through her veins, felt his wolf wrap around her soul, felt the bond between them complete with a resonance that seemed to echo through every cell of her being. And through it all, her daughter's wolf howled with joy. The sound rose through her chest and burst from her throat. Two voices, mother and child, crying out in unison as the mate bond sealed into place. Seraphina felt tears streaming down her cheeks, felt Eric's arms wrap around her and hold her close, felt the absolute rightness of being claimed by this man. When he lifted his head, his mouth was stained with her blood, and his eyes held centuries of devotion. "Mine," he said, the word a vow. "Yours," she answered, the word a promise. "Mates," they said together, and the bond between them pulsed with warmth and certainty, and the unshakable knowledge that they would never be alone again. Eric gathered her into his arms, her back against his chest, his hands spread protectively over her belly. She could feel his heartbeat now, steady and strong, matching the rhythm of her own. Could feel his emotions flowing through the bond, peace and satisfaction and a joy so profound it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I meant what I said earlier," he murmured against her hair. "I think I'm going to love you. No, I know I love you. I love you, Seraphina Valewood." The name hit her like a second mating bite, the claiming of her identity, the complete transformation of who she was. Not Seraphina Blackwood, abandoned and sold. Seraphina Valewood, queen of the realm. "I love you too," she whispered, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. 3 months later, Queen Seraphina of Valewood gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long, nearly 18 hours of pain and terror, and the growing certainty that something was wrong. But Eric never left her side, his hand wrapped around hers, his wolf's power flowing into her through the mate bond. And when she finally felt her daughter slide into the world, the sound that filled the birthing chamber made every midwife gasp. The baby was howling. Not crying. Howling. a wolf's voice rising from a newborn throat, golden light flickering in eyes that shouldn't have been able to open yet. Seraphina reached for her daughter with arms that trembled from exhaustion, and when the midwife placed the howling bundle against her chest, the pup's wolf fell instantly silent. "Hello, little one," Seraphina whispered, stroking the dark fuzz on her daughter's head. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." Eric leaned over them both, his scarred hand brushing his daughter's cheek with infinite gentleness. The baby's eyes, still flickering between gray and gold, tracked to her father's face, and a sound emerged from her tiny throat. A purr. A wolf's purr of recognition and contentment. "She knows me," Eric breathed, wonder transforming his features. "Through the bond, she felt me even in the womb." "She's felt you since the beginning." Seraphina remembered that first touch on the stone steps, the way her unborn pup's wolf had gone impossibly still. "She's been waiting for you too." "What will you name her?" the head midwife asked, her voice soft with awe. Seraphina looked at Eric and saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. "Aurora," she said, "for the light she brings." Eric pressed a kiss to Seraphina's forehead, then another to Aurora's downy head. Through the mate bond, Seraphina felt his love, vast and fierce, and utterly without reservation. Love for their daughter. Love for her. Love for the family they had become against all odds. In the months that followed, the kingdom flourished. The northern reaches, leaderless after Jasper's death, fractured into smaller territories, some swearing allegiance to Valewood, others retreating to lick their wounds. Eric sent diplomats rather than armies, absorbing the willing packs peacefully and leaving the others to their isolation. Word came eventually about Marcus. Seraphina's former mate had fled north after abandoning her, seeking sanctuary with Jasper Frostborn in exchange for information about the pup's power. He had died in the throne room battle, one of the nameless guards who had accompanied Jasper to Valewood. Seraphina felt nothing when she learned this. He had chosen his path, and it had led him to a traitor's end. As for Shadowmere, the pack that had sold her as tribute, Eric offered her the choice of justice or mercy. She chose neither vengeance nor forgiveness, but simply indifference. The pack was stripped of its noble status and left to fend for itself, no longer under Valewood's protection. They would survive or not on their own merits. She found she didn't care which. News of the new princess's extraordinary wolf spread throughout the realm, but the whispers were different now. Not cursed or demon spawn or monster. Instead, wolves spoke of blessings, of prophecy, of the dawn of a new era for Valewood. Aurora's power, still growing, still developing, was no longer something to fear. It was something to celebrate. And Seraphina, who had once been sold as tribute, took her place on the throne beside her mate and ruled with the same fierce protectiveness she had shown in defending her unborn child. Sometimes, late at night, she would stand at the nursery window with Aurora in her arms and Eric's warmth against her back, watching the moon rise over the snow-covered gardens. In those moments, she would remember the prison cell, the chains, the absolute certainty that she was going to die alone and forgotten. Then Eric would press a kiss to the mark on her throat. Healed now, silver and permanent. And Aurora would make that purring sound that meant she sensed her parents' love through whatever nascent bond connected them. And Seraphina would lean back against her mate, breathe in his pine and musk scent, and feel the absolute peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. "Happy?" Eric asked one night, his voice soft in the darkness. Seraphina smiled, feeling the mate bond pulse between them with warmth and certainty and forever. "Happy," she confirmed. "Finally, completely, utterly happy." Aurora cooed in her arms, and somewhere in the nursery, her daughter's wolf let out a howl of pure contentment.